So, welcome and thank you for joining us for Understanding Dyslexia Information series as part of our Go Red for Dyslexia campaign as we celebrate Dyslexic Awareness Month. I am Kina Ramsad, a registered tutor with the Dyslexic Association of Trinidad and Tobago. I've been serving readers of the East for the past 5 years. During the pandemic, our services transformed to online and it gave birth to a world of books. We are an online initiative with the goal of helping kids foster a love for reading through exploration and adventure and creativity. We do this through our book boxes, our virtual camps, and our tutoring sessions. Our tutoring sessions are specifically tailored for dyslexic students or students that need reading remedial classes. As our online catalog expanded, we decided to transition our information session, which is this particular session, into our online platform. Hence, this is our first online information session. So I thank you for joining us. Today, we have a lot in store. However, today we have a lot in store for you. We are going to experience what it feels like to be a dyslexic. We're going to identify exactly what is dyslexia. We're going to dive into how you can markers of dyslexia, what you can do in your classroom to help a dyslexic, and what it means to be a dyslexic warrior. So we'll be doing a lot today. And I think I can close this on. However, as we prepare to enter the world of dyslexia, I ask you to take a moment. So we are preparing to go on this journey into the world of dyslexia. I want you to think about the children in your class, the children in your family, the children in your life. Think about their reactions when you ask them to read. Think about their behavior during class, during readings, when reading is required. Think about the comments made by their teachers related to their reading or even their behavior. Think about their overall grades. Think about their general reaction to school. While we go through the session, I want you to keep these thoughts in mind and those particular children that come to mind when these things come up. And we'll have an open discussion at the end of our session in terms of whether the children in your space is possibly are experiencing anything that we've mentioned during the session. So keep those thoughts in mind. Our first step in our presentation today is a stimulation. We are entering the classroom of a dyslexic, and I'm asking everybody to put themselves in the shoes of a dyslexic right now. So we have a short exercise that I would like everybody to participate in. So on your screen, you're going to see some letters. On one side, you have P and all the letters going down. On the other side, you have B or D. And what is required of you is that you're substituting one letter for the next. So wherever you see a Q, it's pronounced B or T. So this is your key to read this particular passage. So your key is on the side here. We are not going to attempt to read the entire thing. We're going to attempt to read the first paragraph. Once you have attempted it, some of you may actually get it right, some of you may struggle, but I want you to just write in the comments or keep in mind how this exercise made you feel. And we're going to spend about a minute on it. So I'm giving you about a minute, which starts now, to attempt to read the first paragraph. So your minute is almost up. I hope you all have had some luck with it. You can write in the comments how this passage made you feel, any comments at all. Right. What this shows us is how a dyslexic sees print when presented to them. However, they don't have a key to help them make sense of the words. When you ask a child to read, this is what they are actually seeing. To build on this simulation and to help us get a little more insight into how this actually works, we're going to look at a video which is also another simulation, but it is teachers in a dyslexic training exercise.
What we're going to be doing now is round robin reading, and what you're going to do is take out your yellow folder and you're going to pull out an article that says Dyslexia Myths at the top. And once you take it out, let me know when you're ready. And as soon as you're ready, I'm going to throw this ball to you. If I throw it to you and you catch it, you're the one that will be reading. And then I will tell you when you're done reading, and you'll throw it back to me, and I'll ask you some comprehension questions, and then I'll throw it to the next person until we're finished. Okay, so when you get this, you're going to read. Ready?
Dyslexia myths. Unfortunately, the word dyslexia has been used throughout the years, which has teachers, administrators, and psychologists reluctant to use the word. Dyslexia does have an agreed upon definition, and there are specific symptoms associated with dyslexia.
Thank you very much. Can you toss that back to me? So what did you learn?
That it has been abused, and that a lot of people aren't sure exactly what it means.
What has been used in
Dyslexia.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
The bottom line is that it does exist, not matter what name people give it, i.e. specific learning disability, etc. The fact, according to Sally Shaywitz, 2003, is prevalence is actually 1 in 5 children, which is 20%. Think about that. 20% of school population has dyslexia to some degree.
Okay. Now, what did you learn?
That it's prevalent and about 20% of kids have it.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, Michelle?
Dyslexia and the terribly and difficulty with very knowledgeable teaching that making it challenging to decode words, tell incorrectly,
I'm not hearing what you're saying in the video.
Some common miss.
Okay, I don't see it.
Correct information along the way.
Thank you very much. So what did you learn, Ian?
That it impedes fluency, but along the way, there are common myths that people have, misconceptions about dyslexia.
Okay. Michelle?
they see the letters or words backwards. Although it has been a running joke on countless around the dinner table, it is totally untrue. People with dyslexia see letters and words the way without dyslexia too. They
Okay,
just
thank
like
you. We're running out of time. What did you learn?
nothing.
Nothing?
Nothing.
So I've spent all of this time teaching this subject and you've learned nothing. Okay, well, let's see what you can learn.
Okay. People with dyslexia see letters and words the same way those without dyslexia do, and they just take an alternate neurological route to connect that letter with its appropriate sound. It takes them longer, and sometimes they don't allow themselves the time to process that information and guess, which makes it appear as though they're seeing a different letter.
Okay, thank you very much. And what did you learn?
That they process it differently. Not that it's not just flipping it around, they just process it differently.
Right. Okay, you guys are doing fantastic up here. Okay, let's try it back here again. See if we can pull it together.
That is why allowing struggling students the time to their about for them to give it correct. We have to teach them to allow themselves the time.
Are you giving up?
It was the end of it.
Okay, thank you. And what did you learn?
I learned how difficult this was.
Okay, all right, I'm gonna go ahead and stop there. How did that feel? I'm sorry?
I felt awful.
Awful? And what was awful about it?
That they could read and we couldn't.
And why do you think they could read?
They had their right. And what made it difficult too was that you kind of got an attitude whenever we weren't able to read the words. You went, well, then go ahead, you do it now.
Mm-hmm.
And then we were all nice to the people that could read and
Yeah.
had a voice.
So, and as we went along, did you start to feel a little bit more stressed out, a little more anxious?
Honestly, I got lost as to where we were.
Okay.
At the beginning, I didn't even.
Yeah, go ahead.
At the beginning, I didn't even want to participate. I was trying to keep my eyes down.
Great. So, were you terrified that I was going to throw this to you?
Yes.
Okay. Great. Now, you guys, what did you think when you started hearing what they were reading?
I was surprised. I thought they had the same thing, but you know,
Yeah, me
I
too.
was wondering why it was.
I was like, wait, where are we? Wait,
It doesn't say that.
It doesn't, yeah. And then I wanted to help. At some times too, I wanted to help, but I didn't. I don't know. I had this. I wanted to help, but I didn't. So.
Okay. Good. Good. How did you feel?
I was very surprised that they weren't able to read the text because it wasn't complicated.
Okay. Okay. Good. And so, you guys, were you able to learn something from this?
Yes.
Were you able to learn something from this?
Oh my gosh, yes.
From what was in the information in here? Did you learn anything in this?
No, not a thing.
Okay.
I was too worried about what they were thinking.
I couldn't even learn from what they were reading because I was so panicked. So
Okay.
even hearing them,
Yep.
I couldn't concentrate.
This is fabulous, and remember that this is round robin reading, and this is you know some reading strategies that some teachers use is they just pick people randomly to read out loud, and now you know how much stress it can create if you have trouble reading.
Fear.
Lots of fear. This might create a lot of bathroom breaks when this
Yes.
comes up.
Anxiety.
Definitely anxiety. Definitely.
So building on the stimulation that we had before, where we had to substitute the letters in the passage, this is what exactly these teachers went through. They were placed in a situation where this is a text that an average student has to read in your classroom. And as they mentioned, this is an everyday activity. You call upon your students in your classroom every day to read something, but this is what they have to go through. And that creates anxiety, frustration, fear, embarrassment. And most importantly, they were unable to learn anything. They were not only unable to learn from what they had to read, but they were unable to learn from the others in the class. They didn't even want to participate in the first place. And this is what happens in your class or with your kids on a daily basis as they struggle within the classroom. So exactly why does this happen? Dyslexia, the word, is Greek in origin. Dys is a prefix, which means impaired, while lexica as a base word comes from the word lexicon, which means word. So therefore, students with dyslexia are impaired in word level skills, such as decoding, word reading, and spelling. However, dyslexia is not simply a reading problem. This definition is taken from the International Dyslexia Association, and we're going to break it down a bit to kind of dive into exactly what is dyslexia. Let me just, somebody's mic was on. Dyslexia is a specific learning disability that is neurobiological in origin. That means it deals with your nervous system and how the brain works. Dyslexia is linked to your nervous system and the way your brain naturally functions. It is characterized by difficulty with accurate and or fluent word recognition and by poor spelling and decoding skills or abilities. When you are unable to recognize a word, you're going to not be able to spell it, you're not going to be able to read it. So when your reading process is frustrated from the get-go in terms of I am unable to identify the letters and the sounds, I cannot create the word that you're trying to make me read. When I cannot create the word that is in front of me, I can't read the sentence. I can't read the passage. So there's not going to be any fluency in anything that I'm doing. These difficulties typically result from a deficit in the phonological component of language that is often unexpected in relation to other cognitive abilities and the provision of effective classroom instruction. Secondary consequences may include problems in reading comprehension and the reduction of and reduced reading experience that impede growth of vocabulary and background knowledge. The reading process is a very complex process. You have to have understanding of the words in front of you to begin with, so that you can match meaning or recognize meaning in whatever you're reading. When my problem starts in identifying just the letter and the sound that goes with it, everything that is expected of me cannot happen. And I don't have control of this because this is a neurobiological issue, meaning my brain naturally has no control over this. So when you're telling a student they're too lazy or they're not trying hard enough because they're not reading properly or they're not practicing their reading often, they are trying their best. This is just what their best is at this point. They are not lazy. So let's get into the science of dyslexia. The brain has various parts, and various parts is responsible for certain things. We have the part of the brain that is responsible for word analysis, sound symbol connection. We have the part of the brain that is responsible for letter word recognition. We have the part of the brain that is responsible for comprehension skills, or language comprehension, sorry. And we have the part of the brain that is responsible for speech and sounds. In a normal brain, all of these things work together to produce the ability to read and understand. However, that's not the case for a dyslexic brain. So based on this diagram, we have the parts of the brain that they highlighted and its various functions. The second picture of the brain is a typical reader's brain. The lighter parts show where the brain is functioning, or how the brain is functioning. It's recognizing words, it's recognizing text, it has language comprehension, it has sound understanding, etc. It's functioning fine. However, when you look at a dyslexic brain, not all parts are lit up. There are parts that are missing. And that is why it's a slow processing disability and why it is neurobiological in origin. It's just not built the same way. So when you are expecting a dyslexic student to produce work the same way you expect another child in your classroom to produce work, they are already at a disadvantage because their brain is not the same. It's not at the same level, and they don't have control over that. So exactly how does this present in the dyslexic life? It starts with vision. Now, when I speak about vision, I'm not talking about your ability to see, that glasses or contacts or anything like that, corrective lens is going to address or fix. That's not the issue. It speaks to them having difficulty seeing the text. Our first stimulation showed us where the text was disjointed, the letters were back to front or in different places. So some dyslexics see text as moving or blurry, reversed or in reverse letters. This would result in skipping words or lines and losing their place in reading. Now, when you cannot actually see the text that you're about to read and it's moving and it's blurry, your reading is not going to be fluent. You're going to have difficulty reading. You're going to mispronounce words. You're going to misread words. And as observed in the video, you're not going to learn anything from what you read because you're too busy trying to figure out, what am I reading? Okay, is this a C? Is it a A? Is it a B? What exactly is it? So I'm not getting the gist of what I'm reading at all. I'm just trying to just get through the word itself. So reading is going to be difficult. I'm going to have poor spelling skills. Our English language, our spelling is not as simple, or it's very complex. We have our consonant blends and vowel diagrams that where two letters come together to make one sound. When we already cannot figure out the sound of one letter, how am I going to figure out the sound of two letters that make one sound? What two letters make this one sound? I'm going to have difficulty with spelling. Punctuation, grammar, and difficulty structuring text. They're going to come, their writing is not going to be in a sequential manner. They're going to have very disorganized pieces of information. They're going to start with, we were going down the road in the car, then they end up in a van, and their stories are not going to be in order. Because that's a processing, that's where the processing comes in. They're unable to process, so they're just going to throw information out whenever it comes in. Memory. The average brain is able to hold 7 components of memory. If I say, go outside, pick up the bottle, put it in the bin, come back inside, wash your hands, go to bed. That's 6 things. We can normally hold 7. All right, take off the light, go to bed. 7 things. The average brain is probably going to remember 5 things. We can normally hold 7. The average person may be able to hold 5. A dyslexic brain, if you're lucky, they can hold 3. So they are not going to remember certain things, especially when given in sequence. When you tell a student instructions, when you give them instructions, look, copy this from on the board, start doing your exercise. When you're finished, bring it to the front of the class. They have to figure out what book you're talking about. How am I supposed to copy this? There's going to be disjointing in terms of how they remember that situation. So they have very poor working memory. Auditory. When we speak about auditory, we are not talking about whether they have a hearing disability. We speak about them having their hearing being distorted, meaning the way in which they process what is heard is difficult. A dyslexic brain, as we saw, only certain parts of it functions. If we hear the way in which the brain operates, it's split into 2. We have the creative side, the logical side. The creative side of the brain is more active in a dyslexic mind. When I have to make sense of what I'm hearing, that information has to come into one side and go to the other side of my brain. When it's taking that process, but during that process, I'm going to lose what I heard in the first place. So again, the memory constitutes to whether or not how I'm hearing. And this is where they have difficulty breaking up words into syllables. Neurobiological, as we mentioned, it is neurobiological in origin. So they're going to have, as we said, slow processing, word finding problems, and poor organizational skills. The student in your class is very messy. They are writing phonics in their math book, English in their science book. They don't have a sense of order because their brain is already, it's not that does not seem as a thing to them. How does this present in an actual classroom? Preschool to infants is the most difficult part, or the most difficult part of a child's life to diagnose whether they are dyslexic. During this period of time in their life, they are now learning letters, they are now learning phonics, they are now learning to write. So you have the natural slow development of a child versus whether or not this is a neurobiological issue. Generally, they test for dyslexia by age 7, which is going into second year, where, okay, at this point, I'm supposed to have the foundations needed in terms of letter recognition and phonics. However, there are still some markers, and we call them markers because it's not definite that the child will have this and have dyslexia. So for example, mispronouncing words like saying baby tear instead of teddy bear, struggling to name familiar objects and using general words like thing and stuff instead. So they may be asking for a teddy bear, but they are unable to match teddy bear to the word teddy bear. So they'll just say, I need that thing, or I want those stuff. Having a hard time learning nursery rhymes or songs that have song lyrics that rhyme. Rhyming is very difficult. They don't tend to see how the rhyme works. Words are just words for them. So they will hear cat and bed and think that sounds the same. Having trouble remembering sequence like singing the alphabet. If you have to identify a letter in the alphabet, they're going to have to either start over the entire alphabet. They're unable to just identify the letter by itself. Again, because of this, that at this age they are now learning the alphabet, it's hard to say whether or not that is a complete marker of dyslexia. Telling stories that are hard to follow, or having trouble talking about an event in a logical order. So they're going to come to you at this age. They love to tell stories, but their stories are not going to make complete sense. They're going to start off with the lion the lion and the bear were in a fight, and then the lion turned into a tiger, the bear turned into a dog, and the fight turned into a trip to Neverland or something like that. The story is not going to make any sense, especially in order. And obviously having trouble remembering or following directions with multiple steps. As mentioned before, because of their processing and their working memory, this is going to be a limited, this is going to be a difficulty. Now, when a child is left undiagnosed, these problems identified in preschool and infants don't go away. It just builds. So your child is not diagnosed in preschool or infants. That means they did not learn, their phonics is distorted, their memory is distorted. Everything that exists as a problem or difficulty at that age still exists, but the workload is heavier in primary school now. So you're going to have trouble remembering or learning letter names and remembering the sounds they make. They're going to start confusing the general letters that can be confused, the B, D, P's, and Q's. The sound of letters are now going to be also confusing. They're going to struggle reading familiar words like cat, especially if there aren't any pictures. A dyslexic learns in a visual manner. They read visually. So unless there's a picture to assign to a word, they have difficulty reading that word. So things like our sight words, which don't have any visual way to describe them, they come up blank. Substituting words when reading aloud, like house when the story says home. Because they think visually, they're not reading what is actually in front of them. So they're probably going to get the gist of the story and say, okay, you know what, this character is going home while the story says house. So they're just going to say, you know what, the line's supposed to read that the character is going home. I'm going to say home, although they said the character went to the house. So they're going to substitute whenever, because they think that's what's there. Having trouble separating the individual sounds in a word and blending sounds to make a word. That is going to be difficult because one, they're unable to hear the sounds individually. Two, they're unable to recognize the letter. Three, they're unable to match the letter to the sound, far less put it together. Having trouble remembering how words are spelled and applying spelling rules when writing. Our spelling rules, as mentioned before, can be very complicated. So when we get into the vowel digraphs and consonant blends or letters that have alternative spelling, we're going to have a problem because they spell based on what they hear. Moving on to tweens, teens, and young adults. When it's not diagnosed at primary school, it still exists at your teenage years. However, now you have the behavioral aspect of it coming in. At this point, this child is frustrated. They are having trouble reading. Nobody is on their side. They're probably being bullied, they're teased in class, and their self-esteem has been depleted. They are going to start being your problematic children in your classroom. They're going to try to distract you from realizing that they cannot read. So they're going to be the ones getting in trouble, or they're going to be the ones that you barely notice in your classroom. They're going to have slow reading aloud skills coupled with leaving out certain words or parts of a word. So words like off, for, at, they're going to skip over those. Trouble remembering common abbreviations. Often searching for words or using substitutes, as mentioned before with the house and the home, they're still going to be doing that. Or they're not going to be able to understand that gate and fence may mean the same thing. Often not getting the joke or having trouble understanding idioms and puns. Because that requires a lot of background knowledge and use and knowledge of vocabulary and things, they're not going to get that. They're going to be the ones staring at you blank when you tell a joke or use a pun. Trouble completing reading assignments on time. Reading is always going to be a difficulty at whatever level of their life. They're not going to complete those assignments on time at all. Having an easier time answering questions about a page of text if it's read aloud. Dyslexia is not a measure of intelligence. You can read anything to a dyslexic child and they'll be able to understand you. They'll be able to respond to that, they'll be able to participate if you read it to them. There was a recent article published where a young boy has passed all his exams without being able to read or write. His exams were administered orally. He knew the content because it was given to him in an alternative way as opposed to reading and writing. It is not a measure of intelligence. You're not diagnosed, you're going through your life, and now you're an adult. At this point, you have discovered tricks and traits that can get you through life. You may not be able to read, but you can fake it. You have found apps and other devices that you can use. However, you still have dyslexia. At this point, your self-esteem can be very low. You've been through high school, you've been through your schooling system, and in some cases, you've been told that you would amount to nothing because you cannot do the basic reading and writing. So you have no confidence and you're barely functioning. They would appear highly intelligent and score well on intelligence tests, but underperform at work or school. Meaning, as I just said, it's not a measure of intelligence. So they are intelligent, but not on paper. Visual problems while reading. At this point, your dyslexic eyes are sensitive to glare and colored paper. In some cases, not all, dyslexia operates on a spectrum, so no two dyslexics are the same. It affects you differently. Some dyslexics have no issue at all with how they see text. Some of them, they are very sensitive to certain colors and fonts. Difficulty with written communication or tests, including writing notes, messages, or reports. You are in the workspace and you are unable to take a message for your boss or write the monthly report that is required, although you have access to all the technology. You are still limited to do that. Confusing very similar words and letters while writing, again, it did not disappear because you turned an adult. So you're still going to write off for 4 and 2, you might write a TOO instead of TO. You're going to have those confusions. And you're also going to have confusions with your spatial reasoning. Left and right is going to be very difficult for you because of your processing abilities. So given all of these things in terms of how it is presented through a dyslexic life, how do you as a teacher actually teach a dyslexic in your classroom? It begins with empathy. Empathy is the most important tool that you can have for your dyslexic at this point in time. Why? Because your dyslexic is frustrated. You are frustrated because you're not getting to them, but they are equally frustrated because they don't understand why they are unable to do something that seems so simple. They are being called lazy when they are they have been super functioning, meaning they are on NOS at this point. They are trying their utmost best, but that best looks like if they're not trying at all. They are working overtime and still not getting it. And it's not that they don't know. They just can't. It's the way it's the way in which they think. It's the way in which they process, and they don't have control over that because it's their natural ability. So you have to start with a space of from a point of empathy. Then you have to be knowledgeable and informed. I congratulate every one of you for joining us today because this is step 1. Step 1 in helping the dyslexic in your class is to be informed. You cannot treat dyslexia if you don't even know it exists. Dyslexia is very prevalent in the world. 1 in 5 individuals are dyslexic. Yet, very few understand that dyslexia actually exists. So you have to start from being informed. You also have to be knowledgeable about your students' history. Aside from it being neurobiological in origin, dyslexia is genetic. If you have dyslexia as a parent, there's a very high possibility that your child may be dyslexic. If your child has dyslexia, there's a high possibility their child might have dyslexia. It is genetic. Be knowledgeable about the needs of your student. When you know what is dyslexia, when you know that, okay, your child comes from a family of dyslexic, then I know, okay, maybe this child needs XYZ. Do they need reading intervention? Do they need aids in class? Do they need assistance with the content that is being provided? What do they actually need? No to dyslexia does not affect everybody the same way. There are some dyslexics that can copy from the board without a problem, while there are others that are unable to do that exercise. There are some dyslexic that have problems blending, while there are others that cannot identify simple letters to begin with. So once you know where to start with your dyslexic, then you'll know what to provide for them. How do you know your student is dyslexic? Teachers, I have some teachers within our group and I have parents within our group here today. This is the most essential part of your dyslexic life. Get tested. I cannot stress how important it is for your dyslexic to be tested. This is done through a psychoeducation test that is administered by a psychologist or anybody or a particular medical professional. If you call the Dyslexic Association, they can recommend you to somebody like me who have been trained in assessing whether somebody has the markers of dyslexia. That document, however, is not an official document that can be used with the Ministry of Education to provide the aids and accommodations they need within the school system. The psychoeducation test is a medical legal document that can be used with the Ministry of Education to get the assistance and the support your student needs. So it is highly recommended that your student gets tested. How does that happen? You are a teacher in the system, you realize that the student is having some difficulty with language and reading, etc. You write a letter to your principal, or you speak to your principal, and the principal writes a recommendation that they be tested through student services. The parent takes that letter to student services and they get a psychoed test done. Outside of that, a parent has to do it privately. To do a psychoed test privately is a very expensive undertaking. It starts at probably $5,000. And it's a series of tests. A psychoed test is not just one test. There are various areas in which they are tested. So they are tested from their cognitive, behavioral, there are different areas that they test. And when this test is done, you get a recommendation of what exactly the child needs. So teachers and parents, I cannot advocate enough how important it is for you to get tested. Help your students get tested. But before testing takes a while. Right now, the student services has a waiting list of probably 2 years. To do it in the private sector, you have also a waiting list. There are some psychologists that are booked until next year. So it does take a while. But what do you do in the meantime while you're waiting on this test? As a teacher in the system, I do understand and I do recognize that you have limitations in terms of what is available to you. However, if possible, you can use large print text for worksheets, provide color strips or bookmarks to help focus on a particular line. That is what is in the picture here. You can also use a highlighter. Post visual schedules and also read them aloud. Visual schedules are basically where you put a picture that represents the activity. So if it is break time, you put a picture of what break time would look like. You put the word break time as well, but there's a picture that helps them know, okay, this is what's going on and the time. So you provide visual schedules around the classroom and you read it aloud to them. You tell them this is what this says, and you make sure that it's repeated throughout the day during class time. Provide extra time for reading and writing. No matter what, they are not going to finish these writing and reading as the average student in your classroom. It's going to take them a while. Give them multiple opportunities to read the same text. If you're doing comprehension, they're not going to get it in the first go, especially comprehension or any reading in that matter of fact. They're not going to figure it out in the first round of reading. Assigning a buddy to a student is the most effective way that that you can provide right now, given your limitations. A buddy is basically someone within the classroom that can work with that student. They can take their notes for them. They can help them read their text or read it to them, but it's their friend through the classroom setting. They're doing the work. They're not doing their work for them, but they're helping them do it. Assessing. Unfortunately, we operate in a very strict assessment format. We have SEA, CSEC, CXC, etc., and that's very strict and rigid in terms of how assessment is done. There's no bigger room in terms of alternative assessments, really. However, if it is that you're in a position to offer alternative testing, Grade your students on the content that's need to be mastered, not things like spelling or reading fluency. If it is that if they have to write an essay for you, understand that they're not going to get spelling right. If you have to deduct marks for spelling, try to deduct it on words that you know, okay, these are words that are supposed to be familiar to them. Based on their phonics, they will be able to sound it out. But be as lenient as possible with the spelling and the reading fluency, because they don't have control over that. Allow understanding to be demonstrated in different ways. If you can assign a project instead of a written test, let them do a project. If it is that you can assign a creative way for them to get tested, whether it is they do a dramatization of a topic, whether they come and discuss it to you instead, offer those options. Provide different ways to respond to test questions. You have your written tests, try not to have it filled with long responses that they have to write extensively. If you can do multiple choice, if it is that you can offer cues in terms of this is where you start your answer, provide alternative ways for them to respond. Sentence starters are also another way you can help. If you're asking them, they've read a passage and you're asking them to identify what a character did in the passage, tell them where they're starting their answer. Jane did, and you leave a space. What did she do? Provide extra time. As mentioned before, extra time is essential because they need the time to get to process it. They need time to just read it, then they need time to understand it, and then they need time to try and express what they've learned. So they need more time. I cannot stress how much I do not want any teachers or parents to do this, because it's frustrating for the student themselves, and it's a breaking point for them. Don't ask them to read aloud in front of the class or in general. When you ask a student that is unable to read in front of people, you're going to bring on anxiety. When they start fumbling, you're going to bring on embarrassment. When they can't do it, they're going to feel like a failure. Don't ask them, don't put them through that. When this child is fumbling to read something that is seen as normal or easy, the other people around him are going to start to snicker and laugh and make fun of them. You're going to mess with their mental health. Don't ask them to read aloud. Don't ask them to copy things from the board, because they're not going to finish it on time, or they're going to copy it incorrectly. Don't expect them to complete assignments as quickly as the rest of the class. It's not going to happen. However, I do want you to do this in overdrive. Do this until you cannot do anymore, and then do it some more. Support your dyslexic. Encourage, inspire, motivate, and advocate for them. Be the 5-star person in your dyslexic life. Be that person that builds them up instead of break them down. Understand spelling is a challenge, and they are spelling based on what they hear. Understand that they are trying their best. Understand that this is not a reflection of their intellectual ability, and they are not responsible for this. This is a genetic neurobiological disability. They have no control over that. Working together is having a dyslexic in your life, in your classroom, is not easy. I'm not going to say or expect teachers to just go out there and be like, okay, I can do this and get it done. It is not easy when you have a dyslexic in your life, because they require specific attention. And the systems that we operate in do not offer the resources that you need to give that student the attention that is needed. It takes a village, literally, to raise or see about a dyslexic. It requires help from all parties involved in the education process. It requires help from the parent to do the work at home. It requires help from the teacher to do work in the classroom. It requires help from the principal to give the teacher the support they need. It requires help from the tutor that is working with the dyslexic student. It requires the dyslexic student to work with everybody else as well. So it's not easy. I'm not going to sugarcoat it and say you can do this and it's going to work. Teaching a dyslexic to read is very difficult. You may be trying an exercise over and over and over, and you're not going to see the result. There's no quick fix to dyslexia. Dyslexics require structured literacy. It requires a specific way in which reading is taught. It's not the same as the average child. You take out a book, this is the letter A, apple. It does not generally, that is part of it, but that's not all. And it's not easy. You're going to get frustrated. You're going to feel like if I'm trying, and nothing is happening. That's why you need support. You need to be able to work together with everybody involved to get that done. In some cases, you have something called an individualized education plan, which is a document that highlights the specific goals that a child should or is attempting to meet at any given time. However, the system in which we operate, that's not quite feasible. We have a particular curriculum, we have particular things that we need to get done by the end of the month, by the end of the term, and we cannot really break that down, because then the child, you're going to have to keep this child in a separate class. However, if it is that you have the resources and the space and the leeway to create an individualized education plan, and you break down the goals of the student, where you say, you know what, this month, all I want you to focus on is blending. This month, all I want you to focus on is your letter recognition. And we build from there. But however it is that you are able to assist your dyslexic, it requires patience, it requires empathy and passion. Because if you don't have those things, you're going to get frustrated and you're going to feel defeated. And they're going to realize, they're going to read that emotion from you, and they're going to feel as a failure. Get trained. Let me just mute. Right. Get trained. The teaching method that is used to teach a dyslexic can be used for any student. Whether they are natural, they have no issues at all, whether they just have remedial issues, it can be used on any student. And I highly recommend that teachers get trained in teaching dyslexics. The Dyslexic Association offers a training session every July for 3 weeks. I must admit, it is not an easy course. I did that course in 2017, and it changed my life. It made me realize that there's a group of individuals out there that have no voice, and they are limited, and they don't really have support. And the course takes you on a journey through the reading process. At one point, you will feel you are a dyslexic. Then you're going to realize that you've learned to read totally different. Like your education process in terms of reading was probably wrong. You're going to feel like it was wrong. You're going to feel like you don't know how to read. But it's a very, very good course, and I recommend all teachers do it. The information for the Dyslexic Association will be shared with everybody via their emails. You can take it here if you wish. but I do highly recommend this course to anybody that is in the teaching field. Dyslexia is a superpower. It is, they think differently. They think out of the box, literally, and that makes them great storytellers. Now, as much as storytelling can be a marker for dyslexia, they are very creative. A dyslexic is always trying to distract you from the fact that they cannot read, and they find alternative ways to express themselves. So they're going to come up with great ways to tell you what they know. They are very fidgety, so their athletic skills can be very impeccable. They can be physical risk takers. They always, as I said, they're always distracting you from the fact that they are unable to read. So they are born entertainers. And their imagination is, again, very out of this world. They can come up with great creative games because they're always trying to figure out ways in terms of how to learn things. And they're very inquisitive. So because their brain thinks differently and they have to find alternative ways to express themselves because they're limited in their reading and writing, they create different ways to get their message across. And that makes it their superpower. And some people that have been showing us their superpowers are in our midst. There are plenty of people with dyslexia in the world that happen to be very famous. The Archbishop of Port of Spain, the Trinidad and Tobago Olympic sailor, they are both dyslexics. Richard Branson, Whoopi Goldberg, Steven Spielberg, Cher, they are all dyslexics, and they are out there doing fantastic things. So dyslexia is not something that is limiting. Sorry. And this brings us to being a dyslexic warrior. Everybody that signed up for this session today mentioned that they are here to know more. They have a dyslexic in their life, and they want to know how to help that person. And that makes that's where a dyslexic warrior starts. A dyslexic warrior is somebody that is the voice for that dyslexic person. They are selfless and loving and will sacrifice for that dyslexic in their life. They're armed with the right tools, resources, and facts, and is seen as a protector of the self-esteem of the dyslexic community. And I challenge all of you that are here as this is a start of your dyslexic warrior journey. And I challenge you to continue that journey by being informed. You've taken the first step. You've started to be informed. Advocate. The dyslexic in your life need you to advocate for them. They need you to tell the systems, whether it's the ministry, whether it's a school, that they need help. Celebrate their accomplishments. Celebrate their superpowers. Celebrate the fact that they are brilliant, because they are. They may not be able to do things like the normal child or student, but they are great in their own way. Encourage them. Encourage them to be themselves. Encourage them to do more. Encourage them to use their abilities, their superpowers, to be anything they want to be. If they want to be an Olympic swimmer, they can do that. They want to be anything. They are not limited by the fact that they can't read or write. So don't tell them they are unable to do anything. Encourage them to be the best that they can be. And support them. Support them in every form possible. Whatever they need, whether it is that they need intervention in the classroom, whether it is they need remedial classes, whatever they need and whatever their dreams are, support them. Don't make them feel that they are limited because of their natural inability. They did not ask for their brain to have a neurobiological genetic disability. That's just how they came. They are trying their best. And you need to support them in whatever they're trying. And that brings us to the closing of our presentation. And to summarize, I'm going to give you some key points. 30% of students diagnosed with dyslexia also experience at least mild ADHD. Dyslexia operates on a spectrum, so much so that it can be the result of another disability or it may cause another disability. Children with dyslexia are not usually prone to reversals, although it does occur, but it's not part of the definition. So it is a marker in terms of whether or not a child is having difficulty with their B's and D's, but it's not part of the definition because every dyslexic presents differently. There's no difference in whether or not males and females are affected by dyslexia. Dyslexias do have trouble remembering words and phrases, directions. Dyslexia is genetic. It is not a disease, but rather a learning disability. You're not going to catch dyslexia. It's a learning genetic disability that is neurobiological in origin. Inability to tie shoes and problems reading analog clocks is a good predictor of dyslexia. It does not impact intelligence. Albert Einstein had an estimate IQ of 160 and he was diagnosed with dyslexia. Your students or your child do not grow out of dyslexia. They're not going to get up one morning and it's going to disappear. There's no cure for dyslexia. We can find ways to treat it. We can teach a student ways to read, but it's not going to disappear. And most importantly, dyslexia affects 1 in 5 individuals. In some very outdated statistics, in 1990, 100,000 persons were reported to have dyslexia in Trinidad. If dyslexia is genetic, and we do the math, we have a very large population that can be dyslexic in Trinidad. 100,000 people were diagnosed with dyslexia in 1990. We are in 2022. It's genetic. That's a very alarming statistic. And yet, very few people know dyslexia exists. Far less how to treat with it, how to accommodate it, and just simply how to accept it. And this brings us to the end of our presentation. I do know there are some questions in the chat, but at this point, we're going to open the forum for an open discussion. If you have any questions, concerns, you are now free to discuss them. I will go through the chat now and see if I can answer questions as well. While I do that, I will leave my contact information up. If you have questions or concerns that you don't want to share in the group right now, you are free to